Every now and then a product is named something so silly, you just have to take a look at it. That's why today we're gonna look at the Meshroom D. Clearly named by someone that was probably on shrooms. Today's video is brought to you by the new, really super cool JSUSense Melty connector shirt. You know, paying tribute to one of the best designs that's clearly ever existed. And if you don't like the Vaporwave colors, we've got our OG gray and red colors available now. So get yours by following the link in the description below.
Nice.
Ow, I have a thigh cramp. So we were at Micro Center recently, as we typically seem to be these days, preparing for a build that I cannot talk about yet. But I wanted to do a small form factor, and I was kind of perusing through their website, and I came across this, the SUP. Not to be confused with the SUP, which is a Lee & Lee case. I don't think this is a subsidiary of Lee & Lee. I guess it could be. I really don't know. I've never heard of the brand, to be honest. But it is a SFF small form factor case that is nothing but, I'm gonna probably get shocked. It is so dry today. It is nothing but mesh panels. That's why it's called the Meshroom. Now they do have a full, like a full tower case too. That's also nothing but mesh panels. But I wanted to take a look at this on camera with you guys today. It's not gonna include a build today, I apologize, but it's because I'm gonna be using it in something else. But look at this. It's just under 15 liters, so it's not exactly the smallest, case out there. A little wobbly. Once there's weight in there, maybe it'll be flatter, but so anyway, every panel is mesh, as I've already shown. What's interesting is they're like, you know what, I guess if you wanna like water cool it externally, you could, because you've got the, little pass-through ports right there, which means, I guess that kind of defeats the purpose of having a small case if you're just gonna auxiliary cool it with something else. That wobble is really actually bothering me. It's not the table, right? Nope, it's the case. You can get an extension panel for the bottom that actually lifts it up, makes it a little bit taller, and then you can put a micro ATX case or motherboard in there. So it's kind of expandable in that aspect, which I think is pretty neat. So far as you can see, everything comes apart toolless, and I'm not kidding when I say quite literally, every panel in this thing is mesh. The bottom mesh is actually nothing but the filter. There's quite literally nothing in the bottom. And when I picked it up, I told Phil, I said, man, it's so light. Maybe because it's like 50% holes for the entire chassis. So we'll see what comes in the box right here. It is a SFX power supply. It will fit up to, I believe they said 150 by 150 mil. Now I am putting a 1200 watt SFXL power supply in this. It's a 120 by 120 dimension. What on earth could I be putting in here that might need 1200 watts? Anyway, moving on. So it's pretty simple. So one of the things that made me kind of interested in this is the fact that you can still fit quite a bit in terms of like fans. So you can see in the bottom, let's get all the cables out of here. You can see in the bottom here that you can fit, what's the best way to show you this, Phil? It's just a frame. Okay, you can fit up to 280 mil rad in the bottom. They actually advertise this as being like open loop friendly, because you can fit a 280 mil on the bottom. You can fit up to a 280 mil on the side right here. These brackets, as you can see with these adjustable holes in the side right here, can be moved to adjust for the width of the different size fans you want to use, or you could slide it. Well, the top stays where it's at, but these three, as you can see, have three different positions for the size of the fans that you're going to be using. So it's going to be a challenge to fully open water cool this, but you'd have to do something like a 280 rad. You'd have to have like a DDC pump, something small, and then you would probably want to utilize soft tubing, I think, and then obviously the CPU block and maybe a GPU in this, but you would have a hard time, I think, being able to do a rad in the top and a rad in the bottom. Now you can also fit fans on the top right here, as you can see. We got the same rail that's on the bottom, so you could fit two 140 millimeter fans up top. What I'm planning on doing with this though, is I'm gonna be doing an ITX motherboard, and I'm gonna be doing a SFXL power supply, as I said, but also a 240 millimeter AIO on the side. Now the thing I need to make sure here is that I have enough height to where at least one tube is higher than the CPU block. because we need to make sure that we're not going to be having air cavitate in there. And now when you're like this horizontally, CPU will be about here in the center, rad will be slightly higher than it on the side. So that should be fine. Any air should capture along the top of the radiator, not down in the block. I know this case is not new. I know it's been out for a while, but it's new to me, okay? So you get obviously the manual, you get some zip ties that are just tossed in there loosely. And then you get some additional snaps for the side panels if any of those pop off or get lost. And then obviously we have our motherboard screws and fan screws and extra screws for the case itself. So it's really simple. I do think that this would be pretty easy to build in. Let's talk about some of the clearances. For GPU length, you can fit a GPU up to 325 millimeters long. Now, obviously the power supply would be hanging in this area, kind of off to the side, and only so deep, and it only goes down so low, so your GPU should be able to, a big GPU should be able to go under the power supply. Now, if you're using a triple slot GPU, which this can fit, as you can see, we've got 1, 2, 3 slots right there, you're gonna lose support for the bottom fans. So it'll basically intrude down into that area where the 25 mil minimum, unless you want with slim fans, like 15 mil, I guess, you're gonna intrude down into that area. So you'd have to be using a 2-slot card to be able to utilize the bottom fans. What GPU could I possibly be putting in this that might allow for bottom fans? Anyway, so moving on, what else do I want to talk about? I don't have the extension piece on the bottom. As far as I can tell, it looks like the extension piece just, this piece unscrews and it attaches to the bottom, and I know it does include the relocator for the I/O, which I/O in the front, you can see I have 2 USB 3.0, a USB-C. What I think would have been neat, and I wish brands would start doing this, is utilize ulterior or alternative orientations. Like, I would love for this to be able to be a more vertical type of stand. Now, nothing says we couldn't 3D print something to make that happen. There's screw holes here. We could utilize those screw holes and literally make it our own vertical mount like that if we wanted, which would then make the radiator and the CPU less of a concern because we could just have it way up here. I'm gonna grab a graphics card. Well, I got a 3090 is old news. No one cares about that anymore. No one wants to play with you anymore. One thing I want to mention in terms of cooler height though, if you are not gonna be using fans on the side right here, if you remove these brackets entirely, you have up to 145 millimeters of CPU height. There's not a lot of coolers that will meet that criteria in terms of air coolers. You'll find most of them are like 152 and up. 7 millimeters has never seemed like such a large difference until you realize every cooler seems to be about 5 to 7 millimeters too tall. Now you can use like a Noctua U9, that's a 92 millimeter radiator, or excuse me, a cooling tower. You can utilize the Noctua like downfire. I forget which one that's called, and it will actually allow you to utilize side fans with that too. So you could have a fan blowing right onto your downfire cooler, which would be kind of neat. If you put the fans on the side, you're down to like under 130 millimeters of clearance for your CPU tower and your fan. So you need to keep that in mind. That's one reason why I'm personally going with an AIO, because that allows me to get 2 fans in here and cool the CPU. So the AIO can pull in cool air from the side. It's above the GPU, so it won't be affecting the GPU at all because it should be exhausting out the top. And you'll notice that we don't have, I guess if I put one right here, which will probably interfere with that, which means I won't be able to put an exhaust fan here and an AIO there, which means we're about to get really creative on how we set this up. I might have to set the AIO fans to exhaust, to be honest, because the hot air in this is gonna naturally convect. And if I have these as exhaust, it'll at least help pull that air out. Now, GPU temperatures and all that hot air could potentially increase the CPU temp. Fortunately, when you're gaming, the CPU is not under extreme load like the GPU is. I'd rather have the GPU getting cool air from the bottom and then pushing it up to the top and letting the CPU cooler exhaust it out there. One thing I'm not a fan of though, is that if you are using, if you're having a GPU down here that's like a triple slot, like this guy right here, we only have about, 6 millimeters of clearance between the bottom and this. And since this is solid right here, the only place you're getting air in is through this indentation on both sides. So as soon as you get a GPU that's pulling a lot of wattage, sucking in as much air as it possibly can, it'll start to feel really choked off really quickly. But you can see right there, you're not fitting any bottom fans, and you certainly are not gonna have the biggest amount of air gap to pull in air for those fans. So this is why I think we are gonna have to look at printing some taller feet before I move forward with this build. I think that would be most helpful. But I'm gonna have about another slot of clearance available to me when I do this. So, not giving away any clues as to what we're doing, but I think you already know. So looking at the manual, the brackets are they're shown as a multi-purpose bracket, but it doesn't show them being utilized anywhere. So I'm not entirely sure where they're intended to go, but okay, sure. This is the power supply I'm gonna use. It's the Silverstone 1200 watt. It's the Extreme 1200R Platinum. It's also got the Cybernetics Platinum rating, which is like the newest of like, it's not 80 plus, it's like a whole different rating. But here's the power supply right here. One thing I wanna mention, this case does also accommodate ATX, but it will start to get crowded real fast if you use ATX unless you have custom cables, because of course ATX power supplies are intended to be used with ATX cases, which have a much longer cable run that's needed for them. So it's funny, the SFX power supply doesn't even fill the hole. It's intended to kind of go off to the side like that and line up with those holes. One thing I want to point out too is we do actually have a little bit of adjustability too. So you can see how we have 2 hole locations and multiple holes right there. So we can mount it there, or we could scoot it farther forward and mount it there closer to the motherboard. That would just be to give us any additional clearance we might want for the front. I think we can put a fan there. If we can, actually, that would change everything. All right, well, rather than dick around with this in this video, I'll figure out a way to get a fan on the front. I think we need a fan on the front of this thing, just to help. Now, the power supply does mount in multiple orientations. It can go along the motherboard wall here like this for water cooling to give you additional clearance for the side rad right here. Or if you're running a tower cooler, now Noctua does make a tower cooler that's like 92 millimeter fans, but it looks like a D15 where it's got like fan, tower, fan, tower, fan. That width means it wouldn't clear right here. So you can actually take this bracket and rotate it so that the power supply is more on the front, giving you more clearance here. But then the power supply right there would impede on the side mount. So you have an orientation option when it comes to that. I think Supt missed an opportunity here to be able to make this bracket mount to the front to be able to mount a front fan on here. Like I think that was a huge missed opportunity, because any additional airflow would have been extremely useful. One of the things I was concerned about, because I'm gonna be using the Arctic Freezer 3, which is like a 47 millimeter thick rad, I was like, am I gonna have enough clearance between that and the power supply? So that is what I'm gonna test now before I end this video, because that will change everything if it doesn't. I mean, as you can see, that's a thick boy, just like me. And I'm gonna have to do it probably tubes this side. And that's gonna have to like curl around or something, I don't know, because I have the power supply there, so I don't think, that might work. So I actually do have enough room to be able to have the tubes on this end, which will help take up some length. Because all the cables come off the bottom of the power supply, well, they come off the same side of the power supply anyway, but because they face down, means I'm not having to really deal with them pushing like into anything. And then, if I turn it this way, you can get a look of the tubing. And, oh, I don't know. I'm not so convinced now this is gonna work in here, if you wanna know the truth, because that doesn't allow me to turn it enough to get, I think that's actually gonna be okay, like that, because it'll be about right there. No, wait, it'll be about right there. I really hate the way that the Arctic intends for you to put the tubes have to face down. Because remember, this is going in an Intel system. It's not Core Ultra, don't worry. But that means I have to use their mounting plate, or whatever they call it. What do they call that? So they have their own contact frame, but I think that's gonna work like that. Worst case scenario, I might have to put a 140 grill on the fan just so I don't push into it, but I think that's gonna work because it should be fairly centered in between the 4 ITX holes, and I am getting it to clear, and the fan turns without being obstructed. So I think that's gonna work. If you look at it from this angle, you can see it's a bit of a swoop loop pull, kind of like a tying a shoe, but it actually is like just the right length to do it. So I think we'll be okay. Yeah, say a little prayer for me because I'm really hoping that this works, because this is gonna be a really, really cool, blacked out, murdered out, high-end, small form factor build. I just now need to figure out the front bracket because I really want to get a fan in there now. 140 intake, these 2 up here as exhaust, and then maybe if I get a 92 mil in the back, although no, that's not gonna happen because, oh no, they will, because once I do that, there'll be room for the 92 mil. That would be intake as well, I think. This would be a very unconventional case. All right, there we go. That's the Meshroom D. It's interesting, but I think it's gonna be a fun one to build in. Stay tuned. Hopefully one of the very next videos you guys will see will actually be this build done. Resolution for 2025. They're not gonna take a year anymore. They're gonna take 11 months.